Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to And It's Live, the history of the Premier League. We are on, episode 2 really, but episode 1 in all truth, because this is the first part of 92-93, that very first season. The idea will to have 4 parts, one at the start to talk about big themes, the summer that's taken place and big transfers, to really prepare the way for 3 more chronological deep dives as we get to the end of the season. I'm Martin Ramsey, the host, and I'm joined as always by my 2 friends, companions, and intrepid history explorers. Adam Thornton, how are we doing?
Good, thank you. Yeah, looking forward to getting into it. I was not as vocal as I could be on the last one, given it was things that were happening when I was 4, 5 at best. But I'm a worldly 6 by now, so I'm happy to get involved.
I look forward to that insight. David Edgar's here as well. Good evening, David.
Good evening, everyone. Yeah, Adam making me feel my age as I can recall going to the pub to watch some of these matches. So, yeah, we were at slightly different stages in our lives at that point. We still are. He hasn't caught me up or anything age-wise. But no, this was great going back and looking at the summer of transfers. Even though, of course, Martin, back in the day, as crazy as it may seem to some, you could sign players pretty much the whole year.
Up to March, wasn't it? Because the only thing that they did say is when it gets to that big run in, no one can just swipe a player away from someone else. So yeah, the transfer window was a very big window. I don't remember it slamming shut either. Just people shrugged and said, "Yeah, okay,
that's it done."
That's sign players in April, and that's kind of us. Last week we hopefully set the scene for the whole series really by touching on where English football was generally post Heysel and Hillsborough and Italian 90 and Taylor Report and the creeping realization that television was actually a friend rather than a foe. And here we have now the breakaway FA Premier League on Sky. Live matches on a Sunday afternoon and a Monday evening, and the highlights going back to the trusty old anti-Beeb and match of the day making a return, not just for the FA Cup or internationals, but for league action for the first time in some time. So lots to talk about, but that's Summer 92. Let's again try and get into the football. Adam, I'll come to you so often through the course of this series to talk about where the tactical trends were flowing in English football. I imagine you have a lot more to say the further we go. But for someone who's into this kind of thing and who wasn't watching a lot of football at this time, so really when you look back, you're looking back, afresh, I guess. What is English football like in this year of 1992? The champions, First Division champions, the final First Division champions, I guess, were Leeds United. They tended to kind of represent that. Graham Taylor's England, that had flopped so badly in Sweden in that summer, also were I think, quite symptomatic of the style, but correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, that was I guess what I had in my head. But I don't think it's far off. But as always, there's a few outliers, which is quite funny when you look back on it. There's a load of goals scored in this season coming up. I did have the tally earlier on, but it's gone. But I think it was the record actually up until
2023, but it did have more games.
2023, 24, but there's obviously more games. But yeah, even that I was surprised. It was like nearly 3 goals a game, which I guess in my head I don't necessarily equate the 4-4-2 type to lots and lots of goals, because I feel like games that you watch back then, the defence is obviously a big factor, as you mentioned, with kind of some of the Arsenal teams, etc. So that's probably a bit of a surprise looking back. I guess I'm really interested in digging into some of those players that at this stage, and I don't think they would really be classified at this point, but at this stage, players that you might now look at as number 10s or even playing on the wing, or not necessarily a second striker. So I'm thinking guys like Eric Cantona, Teddy Sheringham. Sheringham in particular getting a load of goals. And you got Forrest's first goal, didn't he, before he moves this summer. So players like that, I think I'm interested in digging into. We spoke a little bit a lot on the main event actually at the start about how midfield seemed to be the first real evolution in the sense of defining even what a defensive midfielder and an attacking midfielder were, but then obviously a three coming in. I'm interested in seeing how quickly that comes. Not very quickly, I think is the answer in terms of how much that comes in these games. So yeah, things like that. I'm going to keep an eye on the partnerships. There's a lot more partnerships back then that I'm keen on looking at. The big ones obviously that jump out: Gary Neville, David Beckham. The strike partnerships, obviously, as we know, we're going to see a good few of them early doors. Blackburn, and a couple of others. So things like that. Midfield partnerships, because I don't think in my head I'm thinking, or I think the disservice that you do to central midfielders at this time is they just ran about and kicked everybody and won the ball
one
back.
kicked, one run, right? I mean, it's what one sets, one bombs, and yeah.
I'm interested in, because I don't think that'll be the case. I really don't. I think you're going to see defensive midfielders in really strange positions, and you're going to see what you would class as now even box to box number eights sitting back a little bit. So I think the big, you could say, issue or enlightenment with tactics is that knowledge, as use of vocabulary, use of words has increased, and you start to quantify things, and the coverage that we spoke about before. I think there'll be things back here that have probably always been happening, and someone has just decided to put a name against it now. That's my thinking, and I can kind of understand if that's the case. I can kind of understand why a lot of people get annoyed when people like myself probably seemingly invent new words for things. Like I remember years back, people getting annoyed at low blocks instead of parking the bus, and then when Jose Mourinho was using it, they all of a sudden didn't get annoyed about it. So be interesting to see if there's things like that. Wingers playing on the opposite sides, for example. I'm sure it must have happened quite a bit, but no one ever spoke about it. So things like that, I think it's going to be interesting just to see when things come in, rather than seeing things that maybe are unique of its time.
Yeah, indeed. Let's get into some of the teams then. Anyone, David? I'll go with you. One of you hazard a guess at who was, I think, the overwhelming favourites to win the FA Premier League in 92-93 before a ball was kicked.
United?
Nowhere near it. Arsenal were 2-1 favourites for the title. They'd won, 2 titles in the last few years, 89 and 91. Liverpool 7-2, even though they had a pretty horror season the year before, although won the FA Cup. And we're Liverpool, and we will get into something at the start of next season, so 4 weeks' time, a BBC preview of 93-94, which I think is just fascinating with people's perceptions and expectations, and not being able to just let go of history, a history that kind of gripped them for 15 years. But yeah, Souness is Liverpool still up there. United 92 failed so painfully that previous season, just ran out of goals really in the run-in, and quite a few I think expected that PTSD to remain there. Leeds United, champions of England, 5-1. That a wee bit surprising. Repeating the tricks hard. I get that, but as the season's kicking off, pretty much the same team. They've not. I don't think they've lost anyone significant. We'll look at that in a minute. Sheffield Wednesday are 20-1. Very prominent side at that time. They were third in the first division the season before, and a couple of big signings. One going out the other way too, I suppose. And yeah, Blackburn 33-1, along with Everton, Forest, and Spurs. And the Blackburn Rovers had come up through the playoffs from the first division. We will get to Jack Walker and his millions in a moment. Can I ask you though, David, about the runaway red hot favourites, Arsenal? Very solid, as we know. and their big signing. They make, I think, quite a crucial signing in the winter, but we'll maybe get to that in due course. That's Martin Keown from Everton. But their big signing, and one of the most trumpeted signings of the summer, was John Jensen from Brøndby, I think, certainly from Denmark anyway. A huge summer for Danish football. Of course, European champions. He's very much involved in that. Scored in the final, didn't he? And well,
he did indeed, yes.
He'll pop up a lot doing that, I'm sure, is the thought process. So this was, I guess, in people's thinking, solid base, manager who knows his stuff. They've been champions recently. One of the big players of the summer tournament goes there. Away we go, off and running. John Jensen didn't quite turn out to be that player, and in fact, as we will get to further down the course, a hell of a lot more trouble than he was worth on that particular deal. But Arsenal, David, where were they as we started this whole new ball game?
You had to respect them because of the solidity that you mentioned. Already by this stage, the Arsenal back four is the stuff of legends. That's, already at this stage, they have experience of winning the title, and they are going. They were a side who accumulated trophies. They're going to win 2 this season. They were a very good side. I think that there was maybe a sense that they could be a little one-dimensional at times, and that they could be things that we actually hear a lot in modern football: conservatism, not going for it enough. 1-0 to the Arsenal, of course, is a cliche. But Jensen was brought in. I actually remember, Martin, and this is going to seem laughable in retrospect. It seemed laughable quite quickly once. I remember seeing in a pre-season profile that he was basically the Danish Brian Robson, and he was going to be box to box and scoring goals and whatnot. But an alarming thing for Arsenal fans might have been that his nickname was Faxa, which some of you may know is the Danish lager that comes in 2-pint tins. So it was because of his renowned fondness for that lager that he'd acquired. Now, if your nickname is an alcoholic beverage, then that probably indicates your personality type. Although that was a hard-drinking Arsenal team, of course, wasn't it? They were letting David Rocastle go, and I have to admit, I thought David Rocastle would be a terrific signing for Leeds. It's tragic reasons why he doesn't work out there, and that's because, unfortunately, as we know, he would pass away at a very young age due to cancer, and it was already having an effect on his ability to train and whatnot. But I thought that they were losing a very classy player there, and as you mentioned, it doesn't really get rectified until I would say maybe a couple of seasons later, really. But again, it may be difficult for people to. George Graham at this stage, Martin, he kind of had the stature that maybe Ferguson had 10 years later from here. Would you agree? He was very much seen as good as it gets.
He probably is at this stage.
At this stage, yes.
The manager. Not quite the status that Ferguson would even get in a decade, but he is the manager in this league. He is the boy.
The man, yeah.
I think that's fair. A year before, Souness would probably have joined that kind of conversation, but it hasn't started too well, although he still has an aura, as we'll see, that people just can't see has diminished until it's just completely unavoidable. And Ferguson is struggling to get this league title, although that's 2 years in a row now that Manchester United have obviously won a trophy, the FA Cup and the Cup Winners' Cup, and yeah, they'll do okay. But yeah, I think that's absolutely right, and that has to factor into why Arsenal are such favourites,
and a track record. A track record of picking up trophies recently, a very solid defence that you can rely upon, and some exciting players coming through. That's one thing Arsenal they always did bring through some decent talent or buy well from the lower divisions in England. They were very good at that as well. And I remember though, maybe it was a Scottish thing, maybe it was a knowing Ferguson was why I thought you mentioned there, they came short and they failed, PTSD. But I think maybe knowing his career up here, I just thought, no, that's him now. He's set. He's going to win the league at one point. now that he's settled. So I sort of had United in as favourites. Strangely enough, though, and you mentioned the price there, the team I remember being very much mentioned as if you're going to have a dark horse, if you're going to risk a tenner on a long shot, was Sheffield Wednesday. They were very much seen. And it's one of those situations when you get tipped as a dark horse that often, can you be a dark horse? I don't know. But people were not sleeping on them, and they made some big signings, and they had some real creativity in there. They were a very attractive side to watch, but there was a feeling that this could just be their year, although I don't think anyone saw Leeds United's collapse, certainly not the extent of it coming.
Yeah, we'll come to that. Adam, let's stick on Souness and Liverpool. And this is something I find remarkable, that whatever anyone wants to say about his time at Rangers, spending money like no one else, but he spent it very well. Souness's record in the market was superb. The big ones he got right, the ones that didn't work were because of injury, and no one can really foresee that. And if something didn't work, quickly done, moved on. He made more money than he spent. He was so good. And that touch failed him almost instantly when he returned to Anfield. And it's just a remarkable kind of process here. Ray Houghton goes, 30 years old. Peter Beardsley was papped off the year before, could still do a job. Dean Saunders is probably the biggest one here. He doesn't go until the September, but he lets him go to Villa, basically because he doesn't fit with Rush. That's the partnership that isn't working. And instead of letting go of the most senior player, he dispenses with a player still 28 and would have a fine season at Villa. And he got rid of him to get some money in at the back, and that money basically spent on Stig Inga Bjornby. Paul Stewart came in for Spurs, fine player. But he's starting that Charity Shield with Bruce Grobler. He's 35.
And had been on loan.
I had been in loan. And he just isn't getting this right. He's going to go eventually to, Neil Ruddock and Julian. Does Julian Dix come? Can't remember, but certainly that it just almost.
Dix was the following season.
Yeah, almost the caricature, really, what he was kind of trying to do at times. I find this fascinating. This sudden loss of judgment.
Yeah, I wonder if it's. Well, we always talk about how I think everything comes down to timing and luck as well. As much as we don't want to think about that. If we think about it at Rangers, blank canvas. There, we mentioned the Heysel piece as well in terms of players coming up, more resources than all your rivals, etc. It's almost kind of the opposite here when he goes down there back down there because again we spoke about it on the last show. They've stayed together for a while, this Liverpool team, and they've missed their chances in Europe. We know because of the ban, so it's almost like having to transition now, and how difficult that can be for any manager. You've still got players there that will be highly paid, will be well respected, will be on long contracts, possibly because of decisions made even a year earlier that you might think would be them for 2 or 3 years. But yeah, I think all of this comes down to individual decisions over a period of time, whatever the opposite of marginal gains is, basically over a period of time of just these little things that happen. That Russian Saunders thing, right now, I would be one of the guys screaming to say, you keep the younger player and keep him along for a year or two because he knows what's happening. It's just a fit thing. Try and sell the older player who may be past their peak. At this point, we see it still happening just now. In football, it's a really difficult thing to do, and that's why you need cold, calculated people in there who can understand age curves, trends, all that sort of stuff, how you build a team, how you rebuild a team. I think that's a big skill that people don't use enough of. And we've spoken about the managers that have got longevity, such as Ferguson, even such as Klopp and Guardiola in later years, are the ones that can do that. That they know when they know the point where success is at its peak, and they can try and rebuild and keep going. Ferguson will go on to be the master of it, very much not at this stage. I think it's fair to say. So yeah, I think that Souness piece, I've got a little bit of sympathy there, I guess, because he's not a tactical manager or astute. I would certainly say in that sense, maybe like a George Graham piece. So he's kind of trying to, I guess, build a team in his image again. And it's just not really working. It's that replacing good players with okay players. You do that often enough, and you get to where they get to ultimately.
But the surprising thing, though, for me about this Liverpool team was, you're absolutely right, Adam, in a sense that he's trying to make it combative, and the signings, we've mentioned that Paul Stewart, combative, aggressive type. He would then bring in Neil Ruddock. We all know Ruddock's strength as a player was his strength. Then you've got Julian Dix coming in. These were not signings that Liverpool would have made when Souness was there as a player. And it was almost like a reinvention. And Souness spoke of the way that Liverpool played and the Liverpool DNA, and they were the passing team all throughout the 70s and 80s in their success. And he was a huge part of that. And Souness was a lot more as a footballer than a hard man. But he went for guys who reflected that side of his personality and that side of his playing style without really the skillful ones either. So he was kind of, making them more physical. But to me, Martin, it seemed like he was building a team that, for a style of football that wasn't really in existence anymore in England. It was a physical league, but if you look at the success of United in the next couple of seasons, Newcastle, Blackburn, they married that with a lot of skill. His transfers didn't. And then again, I would also give him a little bit of leeway in that, while even then I found the likes of Ruddock and Dix odd signings for Liverpool, they just didn't fit to me. And that's entirely based on feel. I must admit, I thought Paul Stewart and then later Nigel Clough would be terrific signings. Yeah. And of course they weren't. And by this stage, there's a lot of disgruntlement around Liverpool and the club. And I just wondered if he wanted to do what he'd done at Rangers, which was, I'll sort the back line, I'll make us hard to beat, physically tough, and throughout my time there, I'll continue to add skill. But where is it at Rangers? He found players like Mark Hateley, who was a wonderful cocktail of violence and elegance. At Liverpool, he tended to, I think, just go in the one direction. And what you get is this very physical team playing to a crowd who are not used to this, who didn't like it, who are not that far removed from the Beardsley, Barnes, Aldridge, Rush, Saunders, Houghton era. And they just did not appreciate it at all. It's not like this is a squad of bad players. They're just not players, I think, that fit who Liverpool saw themselves as. And I'm very surprised that someone who speaks so reverentially still of his time at that Liverpool team was buying players that I think in his heart he surely had to know that his mentors would have said the likes of Dix, the likes of Ruddock, they would have been nowhere near a Fagan or a Paisley side. I mean, even the centre-back he brings in, Ruddock, the centre-backs he played in front of were Mark Lawrence and Alan Hansen. Now, they could cope with physical play, but they were footballers.
And that's what he couldn't replace. Hansen retired in 1990, I think, and how often do we see it? It used to be Hansen, Souness, Dalglish ran that dressing room even more than the managers did. They get chocolate biscuits and no one else did, kind of thing. They were absolutely in charge of it all. Hansen, obviously the last to go. He just used. Mark Wright is a decent to good centre back in England at that time. Quite
perennially injured.
Yeah, I know. But we'll maybe finish this show on the Charity Shield match at Wembley. But central defensive leadership communication isn't there.
No.
And he kind of gets one bit of the Paisley ethos correct. He's ruthless. He sees a player maybe on the turn, as he did with, I think Houghton wanted to leave, to be honest, for other reasons. But he was prepared to be ruthless with players that on the face of it were still able to do a job. But what he didn't get right was
replacement
Paisley and he's other colleagues got, and is that they replaced him with something better, and it fell down. But you lack those leadership ability throughout your team, that characteristic. It's no surprise that decent to good players, and there were some, will fall at a club with that weight of expectations. Dave, I'll stick with you. Just one quick one. Out of 40-1 at Aston Villa, under Ron Atkinson, 7th in the first division, I think, the season before. Saunders is obviously going to be key, and where Saunders didn't fit with Wright, he fitted very well with Daly and Atkinson, who we'll get into all that as we go along. But as Atkinson gets injured, which is a big turning point in football history, who knows? But even with Dwight York's a very, very different player, Saunders can still adapt and can still form a fairly good understanding and rapport. They're going to have a good OG. There's some wily experience in there, not just Houghton. Paul McGrath's there, Steve Staunton is there. They've got something about them. I mean, guys like Kevin Richardson still kicking about, still captain, I think. They're going to have a good old crack at this.
Yeah, really fine footballer. Kevin Richardson's quite underrated. He was part of the successful Everton era in the 80s. Then he goes to Arsenal and he's part of the successful Arsenal era at the late 80s. Then he goes to Villa and they're a pretty good side as well. It's not coincidence. He's just a very underrated footballer, maybe because he never really made the breakthrough into international. But they signed some character in the summer. They signed Dean Saunders, they signed Ray Houghton, winners, right? Guys who've had the pressure at Liverpool. And the case of Saunders still very much with an awful lot in the tank. Although I think Houghton, I'll just double check, he was 30 at this point. So he wasn't completely done. But they also bring in Frank McAvenny. He arrives. They also bring in Les Sealey. Now, they don't play much, but that's in a brilliant dressing room under an ebullient manager. And I think the confidence of their young player, Martin, reflects that. I think that they play, this Aston Villa team wins many admirers, as Ron teams could do, because he was, at heart, I think, a football purist. He did want football to be played in a certain way, and maybe that held him back at Manchester United. That sometimes people talked about the style and there was more of that than the substance. I really enjoyed this Aston Villa team at the moment. He utilised some fantastic pace up front. He was very good at that. And then there were a number of clever players. You've mentioned a couple of them there. Adding Saunders, though, I thought was a masterstroke because his ability to knit together midfield to the front line. And Adam mentioned earlier things that were renamed. Number 10s. It was quite common, although the idea is everyone plays 4-4-2. A lot of these sides played 4-4-1-1, and they had a striker, a nominal striker, who would play just behind someone. And if you had someone like Saunders, Beardsley at Liverpool and then later at Newcastle, that could sit there in the hole, as it was called back then, Adam, that was the technical description. You're playing in the hole. I thought Saunders was just an absolutely terrific bit of business. And Steve Staunton, it's it genuinely isn't an exaggeration to say that he is one of the finest players in the league at this point. His form for Villa is possibly even, I'd argue, was better than what he showed at Liverpool. And he was good at Liverpool, but I think he was absolutely magnificent. And Paul McGrath's having an incredible career renaissance at this point. Couldn't train, no cartilage left in his knees, would go out on Saturday and would be absolutely magnificent, with a particular emphasis of doing it when he came up against his old club.
I think the Saunders one for me is inspired because Dwight York has his breakout season the year before. I can't remember, he got like 17 goals, maybe, was it for Villa in the old first division. Daly and Atkinson, as you mentioned as well, but 19, 20-year-olds, I think, at that point, bringing in someone like Saunders to play alongside them, play off them, whatever we will dig into in terms of how that did. I think that's good management. We spoke about Souness there in terms of maybe recognising that something needed to change, but maybe not going about it in the right way or getting in the players that would allow you to change and evolve. I think that was a really sensible signing. Liverpool's loss obviously is Villa's gain in that one. But they've got a good couple of youngsters coming through. Ugo Ehiogu, teenager as well, at this point as well, coming into the team. Again, a position where they've got a load of experience and someone coming in there. So it just seems like it's got a nice balance to it. So I'm not hugely surprised that they have a decent season looking at it.
Let's look at some of the more interesting transfers, Adam. I will stay with you. Let's go to Blackburn Rovers. And they had just come up the previous season through the playoffs, so not straight away. I think Ipswich had won the second division. The most sought after striker, I guess, through last season was Southampton's Alan Shearer. And he ends up at Blackburn. Probably he must be the biggest signing of that particular summer. Just under 3.5 million plus David Speedy, I think, the other way. Stuart Ripley comes in from Borough, who will be very influential to the way that they eventually kind of go about their business. And then other key players coming in the winter. I think Henning Berg coming in the winter, Graham Lasso coming in the spring, Kevin Gallagher coming later on. It's not all done in the one go. They'll have other bits to fit into place before they're champions. But I do definitely remember a lot of excitement about what Blackburn Rovers might do in this new league.
Yes, it's a nouveau rich type scenario, isn't it? It's always quite intriguing, I guess, especially with the manager as well. That's a big statement that I think having kind of released there. Tim Flowers, I was never a huge fan. That's a load of money for Tim Flowers back then. If you think, imagine someone like Tim Flowers going for 75% of Alan Shearer's fee. It's a lot of cash back then. There's going to be a few things in these early seasons that I just wasn't aware of. I like to think, we always play that game where maybe it's just us, maybe normal people don't, but when you put up the Wikipedia career history and you like name this player, don't think I knew that Graham Lasso was at Chelsea before he went to Blackburn and went back to Chelsea. I don't think that was one that was in my mind. So yeah, it looks sensible to me. It really does. It looks like, again, maybe similar to Villa, where we've got in Blackburn's case, we've got a lot of money here, but we're not just splashing it willy nilly. We're going for what we think we need, really, rather than I'm just going to go and buy all the new toys. So Shearer coming in has an excellent start, which we'll come on to. That first game is phenomenal. Some of the goals, but just some solid signings. They already had a decent defence, I think, or certainly a centre half pairing that was very good for where it was just now. Midfield was decent. Maybe they lacked that little bit of firepower that obviously Shearer gave them, and then clearly in goals, an upgrade was needed. So I think it looks sensible. It's interesting to see them filling those gaps. Like I said, Stuart Ripley on the wing. Okay, in my head that makes sense. Stuart Ripley banging in those crosses for Alan Shearer and Mike Newell. That seems like it works. Sherwood, Marshall in the midfield. It just makes sense to me. And although it is direct football, there's no getting away from that. It's definitely attacking football. It's not just get the ball forward. It's get the ball forward in an effective way. We're going to have a strong back four, strong midfield, but we'll have two wingers that can supply the bullets for Shearer. And when you've got someone up front who has that power, aerial ability, and finishing ability, it's very, very difficult, I think, for teams to deal with that. You've also got all the noise around them, I guess, and I would imagine, I'm not sure how much this was at the time. Maybe you guys can tell me, but I would imagine there would be a lot of clubs that weren't thrilled about a club like Blackburn being bankrolled. If you bankrolled in the sense that almost like a kind of Abramovich of 10 years later, it's an artificial bankroll, and I don't know what the appetite was at the time. I don't know if you guys are aware of that landscape, if there was fans being out saying it was unfair or feeling threatened or anything like that, but it's certainly got that vibe to it.
Not so much unfair, because I think that it had been done before. the local businessman done good, buys his local football team and puts money into it. I mean, even Brian Clough's Derby County, Martin, was Sam Longson, and they spent big for the time. I think there was a sense of interlopers, to use a good Scottish word. There were these nouveau riche arriviste types who were coming up and that they were going to be put in their place, but almost immediately they tooled up for a proper campaign. There was no sense of them coming up and being naive that you sometimes get now, and football's of course changed radically. They came up and look at those signings. These are tough players, even the skillful ones. Sherwood was a very good footballer. It's sometimes easy to forget when you hear him talking, but he was a big
signing. He was a big signing from Norwich, and
he was a real quality player, Tim Sherwood, and he bossed that midfield. But then, it is a simple plan if it's executed well, which is you have two wingers who are there because they are accurate crossers of a ball. They can beat a man on the outside and cross the ball. And then you're going to have one, possibly two big guys in the centre. The success comes with Shearer and Sutton in the side. So their overall game plan was simplistic, but they bought very, very good exponents of that football. And there also is a lot of character in there as well. You can't take that away. So there was a sense, Adam, though, from the existing teams that they were going to give these upstarts a bloody nose. I don't think there was resentment as such, but there was still a we're a proper big dog. You're just you're a lottery winner, big dog. You're not the same as us.
Which is, I think that dynamic's normal. Any young tuck on the scene, there's an excitement for the neutral around what they could do, and I absolutely bought into that. I was really into that Blackburn team because they were new, and absolutely some of the top sides very much willing to give them that bloody nose that David talked about. None of I don't think, happy to dig into this the further we go, that there was resentment. I think there was genuine romanticism around the local businessman who sold the steel company for £300 million or something like that, and wanted to win the title for his club. I mean, it's almost boys' own stuff in a way. So I think that was the narrative, certainly. Very different from, let's say, foreign ownership from 2003 onwards.
Then there was a sense of this is somehow unfair. I think then it was, and in a way, it was sort of your dream once you got too old to be a player, wasn't it? That you thought, I'm too old, but I could win the pools as was then, and would soon be the lottery. And I could buy my team, and I could buy as a couple of £1 million players and go forward. And now you can't do that because obviously to buy a major football club in the Premier League, you're not talking millions anymore. But yeah, I think there was a sense of freshness about this Blackburn Rovers team. This Shearer signing was a statement. He had played at Euro 92 in that England side. He started there. He was already established. People, because of, I think, Martin, what he goes on and does, and Adam, I mean, you'll primarily know Shearer, I would imagine, from Newcastle. That'll be where you remember him from.
Mostly,
yeah, and he's so identified with that it's almost become, I think, he had this short spell at Blackburn, he won a league title, and then he went and he became Mr. Newcastle. And his Southampton days sort of, never get referenced. And yet, he was in the England team, right? He was seen as an absolutely, proper, and he was so hot in this summer. Would he go to United? Would he go to Liverpool? Were said to have an interest. He would have been absolutely ideal for Arsenal, by the way. See if Arsenal had signed him in that, but they weren't going to spend the money that summer. But if they had, they'd have won the league. I have zero doubts about that. Possibly the treble because they were good enough to win the other two cups. But it's just interesting, and I think it's because he's so identified with Newcastle United now that people were they've only got room for and he was at Blackburn for a bit, and then he got the dream move to his boyhood club. But he was not arriving. There was pressure on him to deliver. It was a huge fee for the era, but he was arriving not as promised, but more as he will help fire us to, well, maybe not the title in our first year, but you know, we plan this season to make a big splash, and he's a big part of that.
Very interested as we go on, Adam.
At that point. That was the record.
Yeah, I think it must have been. The following season is where you get Keane for 3.5, and then Duncan Ferguson to Rangers for 4.
Yeah.
I'm very interested as we go, Adam, from a tactical point of view, how you rate your comments on Dalglish's transition from how his Liverpool teams played, and they did not play like this, to just saying, well, that's what I've got, and we need to kind of fast track this. Therefore, let's go quite rudimentary, but very effectively rudimentary. I mean, they basically took the 18-yard box and just extended that the full length of the pitch, and that was the zone, really, and it was just all about firing those balls in repeatedly and repeatedly and repeatedly, and it worked in the end. But we'll get to that in due course. A couple of other signings then we should probably speak about. When we kick off the season next week, the first Super Sunday, there's one goal and it's scored by the eventual top goal scorer, I think, that season, Teddy Sheringham, but he does not stay at Nottingham Forest for too long. He goes to Spurs, Adam, and again, an interesting. It's always interesting at Spurs. I mean, they're just an incredibly fascinating club with joint managers at this time. Yeah. So Sheringham comes in later. They have the aforementioned Neil Ruddock, also from Southampton that summer. And again, I'm sure David would back me up here. One of the other hot prospects in English football from the South Coast, but from the other big club in the South Coast, Portsmouth, and that's Darren Anderton, had shone very well for Pompey against Liverpool in the FA Cup semi-finals, I'm sure, of the previous season. And again, it just looked like Spurs were making good signings. Putting them all together, of course, is always the fun.
Yeah, he seemed a very Spurs sign because he was a very exciting player at this time, Darren Anderton. Again, I think Anderton's a player who something else maybe upstages his how history views him, and that is, of course, he was famously the first sick note. Not his fault, incidentally. He wasn't injury prone. Spurs sent him a surgeon who misdiagnosed the injury, gave him the wrong treatment, and ended up causing him 3 years of problem. And then once it finally did get identified and fixed, he was fine. But his reputation was already set in stone by this point. And Tottenham, even then, Martin, I think, had the reputation of being glamorous and nearlies. That was their lot in life. And signing a player like him seemed to fit that characteristic very nicely because he was exciting, he was young, but in the way that someone like, say, Shearer was more your traditional, British type of striker. Anderton was almost continental in the way that he played. He had been brilliant that season before. There's absolutely no doubt about it. And look, Darren Anderton, when fit, insert your own joke, was a terrific footballer for Tottenham. He wasn't getting in those England squads because there was a Spurs quota, although you'd have been forgiven mid-90s under Terry Venables for sometimes believing that there was. But he was a very, very good player. But I just, and it's so funny to be sitting discussing this in 2025 when I think we've probably heard more in the last year or so the term Spursy than ever. But even then, I always had the vision of them, and I think in the papers, a very big team, which they were, very well supported club, glamorous, undoubtedly. Players like Hoddle, the 61 double winners, etc. But yeah, just a sense of, but they can't win the title. They may pick up a cup because they had a reputation as a good cup side. And it was just it's quite staggering that it's a reputation that they just cannot seem to shift. I'd be intrigued to know from people who are even older than I, when Spurs developed this, was it the 70s perhaps, when they got that relegation, and they bounced up and then won a cup. But even at that stage, there was something fun but lightweight about Tottenham, even in this era.
Is the Gaza thing still an issue at this point? In terms of, so obviously he's injured when he goes in season before, wasn't it? Was it the summer before? Sorry,
summer before. Cup final 91 when he injures himself. Yeah,
he officially goes this season because obviously the Lazio transfer has to wait 7.5 million, I think. So yeah, that's a big deal. What I was going to ask you, Adam, again, talking about how English football is maybe a bit rudimentary. Where's a player like Teddy Sheringham fit? Is he ahead of his time?
Definitely. Yeah, 100%. I think, I guess in my head, when Sheringham is first appearing, and for me it's Spurs, yeah, obviously. Again, it's all about defining players. You just didn't do it when I was a kid in terms of where their roles are, all that sort of stuff. But for me, yeah, he's ahead of his time in that sense that he's got a nice touch, lovely touch, good,
really
great movement, good finishing, really intelligent, and it's kind of what you don't expect back then. You expect everybody to be big, powerful guys, and
which
it's just not the case.
No, he could be. I mean, he came through the ranks at Millwall alongside Tony Cascarino. They were a big partnership at the time. But he goes to Forest. Brian Clough's latter Forest were footballing sides, sometimes accused, actually, Martin, remember, of being too nice. Forest, that he won things when he had these difficult characters, but then he wanted a dressing room full of nice young men like his son and Peter Davenport and guys like that. But Sheringham, he could throw those elbows when he needed to.
Yeah.
Very good in the air, great timing of a leap. One of these guys who doesn't just wait for it to hit him on the top of the head, and could guide a header really well. I think in terms of a modern footballer, Sheringham, he would be absolutely dream material for a guy now, for a manager now, because you could play him as the focal point of a 4-3-3. And he could hold the ball up and bring people in. You could play him as a number 10. You could play him in a 4-2-3-1 as a central player. Teddy Sheringham, I think, would have been absolutely like one of the greats if he'd been a bit quicker. That was the one thing he didn't have. Everything else he had.
But he's pace of mind, isn't it? You could see in his vision, he kind of made up for that. But yeah,
like a prototype Berbatov, isn't it? Really?
Yes.
Like a Berbatov of 10 years before.
Yeah.
A couple of other interesting things from Spurs for me. Again, those I'm probably going to selfishly look at players that are starting now or starting to appear now that will obviously become maybe not fully household names in some cases, but ones that I certainly was aware of. Was he Nick Barmby at this point? Was he still Nicky Barmby? I'm not sure, but 18 years old, coming in and playing pretty much every game, scoring 10 goals is again not something I think about back then. I always think it's going to be experience over young players coming in. That seems fairly impressive there. Sol Campbell makes his debut. I think he scores a goal in his debut, and that's literally all he plays this summer. But that's two that are coming in, and then one from my naivety as well, which I did not have any idea about. I'm almost quite embarrassed, but this one I had no idea that Naeem was at Spurs. That any memories of that is obviously Naeem scoring against Arsenal in the Cup Winners' Cup final, but I don't ever remember anyone telling me that he was ex-Spurs. That feels like it would be the leading point of some of those things. So I'm really surprised to hear that he was there for 4 or 5 years. Before that must have been an absolute nightmare for Arsenal fans. Which
it was. The Tottenham had a Naeem from the halfway line was a chant.
I remember all of that. I just assumed they were people just took the piss because they got lobbed from the halfway line. I did not pick up the Spurs aspect of it. So that was an interesting one looking back on as well.
Yeah, I think young players got their break, Adam, in those days. Maybe less pressure. Steve McManaman's busting through at this stage as well. Fowler will be the next season, and my goodness, yeah. So I think they got a fair shift. Forest losing Sheringham, losing Des Walker
Yes,
to
huge.
Italy, and didn't replace, didn't spend the money really, and that's not going to go well.
Was that expected though? That was something I wanted to ask you, Martin. Was that expected? Because obviously they've had the European success. They've what, 2 or 3 cup wins, another 2 finals. But is it on the slide now?
Recently.
Yeah, they won
Is
a
it on
League
the
Cup.
slide? Or...
Well, yeah, but they were perennially top 10 Forest.
Yeah.
And there was always actually a sense of, rather than that they're on the slide, it was a couple of good signings, and they could be there. I mean, the Clough factor was enormous. And what we didn't know at the time is his alcoholism at this point is bad. And unfortunately, you can't separate that from what happens in his final year.
We'll get to that end, David, but his interview to Barry Davis or Martin Tyler, I think it actually is, and it's sad.
Yes,
it's kind of sad to see. So, I mean, as David says, fairly consistently in the top half for a while, won a League Cup, and he has this aura, right? I mean, and they'll be fine. You don't see it until it's there, and it's going to be very, very tough for them and hard to watch. I think just a couple other ones before we move on, or just one more signing before we look at maybe 2 more teams. We could be here all night, obviously, if we're going to look at all 22. And remember, it was 22 for those first couple of seasons. You alluded to it earlier, David. Sheffield Wednesday, 3rd. Couple of good signings. Mark Bright comes in, very, very good goal scorer. Him and Ian Wright, of course, at Palace. Both great foil. Wright had gone to Arsenal the season before. And from Marseille, for £1.5 million, Chris Waddle. Obviously coming to the end of his time, but he's going to enjoy himself this season, especially in the cups. But it was just a brilliant, swan song, brilliant kind of finale to a great career.
It really was, and it probably sounds baffling now to people who weren't around. It's like, why did he go to Sheffield Wednesday of all clubs? It was a reasonable place to go. It wasn't a shock decision to go there. They were a very respectable team, a big club at the time. I'm still a little surprised, Martin, that none of the really big clubs could find a space for him. United didn't need him, obviously, given the wide talent that they had and gigs. They didn't need him, so that's fair enough. Would Chris Waddle have improved Arsenal? I would say so. Would he improve Liverpool? Yes, definitely. Could he have done the job for Blackburn? Yes, although eventually it works out quite well for them with Wilcox and Ripley. But I think the Sheffield Wednesday seemed such an exciting, they seemed on the up, didn't they, at this point? And they seemed like a team who were capable of going and winning things. This was in the period where Taylor just wouldn't pick him. And it was quite bizarre because, we didn't see a lot of French football, but when we did see him in action, he seemed to be absolutely flying. But that English mistrust, that era of mistrust of the talented player, or the maverick player, rather, at international level, Sheffield Wednesday were prepared to give him all the tools, build the apparatus around him to succeed. And this season, we're going to talk about it frequently, he succeeds wonderfully. He ends up winning the Football Writers' Player of the Year, and he was an absolute joy to watch. And the thing is, this is a show where we talk about football history, but we're also fans. The thing I loved about Chris Waddle is, after about 2 minutes of every match, he looked absolutely knackered. You would see him, sweating, red-faced, hands on the hips, and you think, my God. And then 60 minutes later, he'd be just skirting past 3 or 4 defenders. And he was a remarkable talent and really watchable footballer. But what a great pickup for $1.5 million, which wasn't cheap. We're just on the record is 3.3, 3.4, whatever Shearer went for. But what you were getting for that was as close to a guarantee of quality in that league as you could get at the time.
Is there an element of, again, trying to think of it with my logical brain from now, is there an element of stars on the wane a little bit at this point? out of sight, out of mind, I guess, maybe being in Marseille as well, but he's coming back now and he's, 32, 33? Are there certain teams thinking
It's a lot for
how
a guy
much we're
that
going to get out
age.
of him?
Yeah, I think Sheffield Wednesday is perfect for him, Adam, to be honest. And
Yeah,
Trevor
he didn't really
Francis,
athlete either.
yeah, well, this is it. I mean, Trevor Francis, for example, is another manager, still a player manager, I think, this season. I don't know how many games he played, right enough, but another manager on the rise, I think, with a bright future, very gifted player, very clever guy. So usually put those two together, that makes for quite a decent coach. So I think it made sense. Third the season
Third the year
before.
before, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean Liverpool know because they had McManaman, and I think they would have invested and supported that. Blackburn no, because I don't think he had the engine to do what their wide players did, and he could basically just get free rein at Sheffield Wednesday, which is what he wanted.
Yeah.
And you can't do that in that Blackburn team. Arsenal's an interesting one. I'm trying to remember.
They didn't score a lot of goals, did they?
No, they didn't. Was Limpar on the left? I can't remember. And whether Graham would then have kind of two players that flamboyant, I'm just not convinced. Although if he did, yeah, there's probably some joy in it.
You don't need to be convinced. You're right. He would not. He had the option to, and he didn't.
Same with Leeds as well. No, Leeds. You having Cantona was on the same thing.
And speed, and yeah, no, you're not. So
and
I think,
and they spent $2 million on Rocastle this summer. Remember?
Yeah. That was their big. That was their big outlay.
He's their big outlay, and they think. And understandably, Rocastle's a fantastic player, nice Pete. Yeah. They think that'll be the creative, and they were a hard-working side, and they got the ball forward quick. Leeds,
and they've got Strachan as well, so they've got and McAllister, and they've got ball players, right? Quite a lot of them. So I don't think that's going to be an option either. So no, I think it made perfect sense for both club and player, and 2 cup finals, and just a shame they didn't get one over the line. 2 teams I want to just briefly look at before we touch on the Charity Shield, and that sets us up for starting next week. Bit of a fire sale at Carrow Road, David. Again, just getting players out the door. Robert Fleck being one of them. In comes Mark Robbins, the man who saved Alex Ferguson's job. Blah blah blah. And I think Efan Okoku came in as well.
And the Ginger Mourinho, Gary Megson.
Yeah. And it's a manager or managerial turnaround. You're left with Mike Walker, who I think was a reserve coach at one stage, former goalkeeper. He's left in charge. I'm not entirely sure how well thought of and loved he was at the time, but they looked to be huge outsiders, 150-1 as it was, but they would have a jolly old time of it.
Yeah, anyone who predicted that they were going to have the season that they had, well done. But I would consider you a fibber. But they had a real good crop of young players coming through, Martin, that people were not quite as aware of. Promoting Mike Walker is, again, one of these things where the club knows him, but the outside world don't. And therefore, there's going to be suspicion out with this. And what he goes on to do in the rest of his managerial career, I mean, I remember him at Everton, where he was awful. It was just one of these magical, mystical things where crop of players who he knew from, as you mentioned, their youth and reserve coaching, come through. They're perfect for him. He's perfect for them. And some kind of weird alchemy goes on. And when you removed him from that, nothing. And I mean nothing. He's a dreadful manager at Everton. They did not look. I mean, I thought they might be a side that would be scrapping about the bottom, to be honest, because the signings, they didn't seem to have firepower. Little did we know they actually had a lot, as it would turn out. I will say this for them, though. They managed to get Robert Fleck off to Chelsea, and a Chelsea supporting acquaintance tells me that he may well be the worst signing Chelsea have ever made.
Yeah,
so well done for getting the money in for him.
Didn't work out. The two youngsters, I guess, David, you'd be referring to Chris Sutton, only 19, I think, the start of this season, and Will Fox, who would provide much in the way of delivery for Norwich in these early years of the Premier League. But yeah, their story is one to look out for. Manchester United then. Still hurting. Well, European trophy, I guess, to finish off 91-92. I don't know how much that does for the whole league shambles. The League Cup from 91-92. The Cup Winners' Cup was 91. But that's 3 in a row, 3 seasons, 3 trophies. But the nature of that collapse, where they lost it, everything all rolled into one. This is now 5-6 years into the project, and it's still not brought the one thing that they were after. Dion Dublin, Adam.
Yeah,
it's who Sir Alex Ferguson, not Sir at that point, nowhere near Sir at that point, but it's where Ferguson reaches to turn everything around, and not completely a ridiculous signing, but a lot of money, and their luck is not going to continue for a wee bit.
It was a surprise, though, wasn't it? Because they obviously wanted Shearer as I think is the most.
They were linked. They were linked with Shearer strongly. In fact, I remember reading at one point, man, am I making this up? That basically they had him, he'd agreed to join them, and then a couple of days later he showed up at Blackburn.
Yeah, there's it's a bit of a farrago, yeah. The same with it moved the opposite way the following summer, because Keane had basically agreed to join Blackburn. He told Kenny Dalglish he was going, and then that got moved around. So yeah, there's quite a bit of that good old fashioned managerial telephone calls to houses and whatever at all levels to get things kind of done. And as I said, John Jensen in other ways getting it done. But there was hotly sought after, which made the Blackburn story, Adam, and the Blackburn noise all the better, because this isn't just a club that we're buying smartly under the radar. They're one to watch. This guy, the hottest striker, has to go to Manchester United. They've run out of goals. This makes complete sense. They're still the biggest club in the country, and it doesn't happen. And where was Dion Dublin from? Cambridge United?
Cambridge.
Yeah, and we know how it starts, and it's quite tragic in a way. But he was a good player, but he wasn't Alan Shearer. No.
Is there not a bit of a double sliding doors here? Because obviously they don't get Shearer and they get Dion Dublin, but then he scores one goal, doesn't he? Before he breaks his leg. But then do they go and get Cantona if they don't have Dion Dublin? I know it sounds bizarre in your head, given that they're completely different types of players, but Mark Hughes was number one, right? He was the guy.
No, top. I mean, there's no guarantee. If Dion Dublin doesn't break his leg, and we know how stubborn, incidentally, Ferguson. You mentioned Souness earlier, Martin, would move people on. Ferguson would play a player until he was successful, or until it was beyond all reasonable doubt that he wasn't. Very rarely, I can only really think of him ditching maybe Taibbi quite quickly. But yeah, I think it's a totally reasonable sliding doors, Adam, that if Dion Dublin stays fit, and he may well have done well for Manchester, because he was a good player. Look what he goes on and does at Villa. But he wouldn't have had the impact. Coventry too, yeah, but he wouldn't have, he couldn't have the impact that Cantona. Just isn't possible, because that's as much for the
personality.
The chemical effect of his personality sweeping around that football club. But yeah, had he not been in that tackle, who knows what the next 10 years looks like.
And it's a very Ferguson thing to do, I think, as well. That even if he was never someone that I would class as ever really replacing like for like a lot. That's that evolution piece that we mentioned before. That makes him the greatest. I think English Premier League manager for sure, because it was never Dion Dublin is out injured, I'm going to go and get
a Dion Dublin
similar. Yeah, it was that's never something I've ever associated with him. It's, well, I'll go and get the best player for me, and I have an awareness of my head of where the gaps are, and then I'll move people around to get the best out of that player. It's always what I thought of him. So it's going to be interesting to see how that works. Here they've obviously spent a lot, haven't they, before this, and that pressure. What was it, the 60s? 20? Yeah,
26. Yeah, 26 years.
26,
well, it'll be years. At the end of this. It'll be 26.
Yeah. 67
since they won it. So and it's interesting, the whole biggest club thing, because you've obviously went through that Liverpool success by that point as well, and it's one of those things you wonder if it's biggest club in name only, really, isn't it? At this point, I guess, if they've not won the league for so long. So
what I will say is, I noticed
that's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, what I'll say is, I noticed at my age at the time, and reading the mags and listening to phone-ins. Martin, remember the birth of 606, and the ABU started really quickly, which I think is always indicative of the size of a club, is kind of how hated it is. And when they began to look like they could be successful, I mean, I really noticed the virulence of the attitude that sort of came out against them. In a way I don't think was replicated in later years when Liverpool began to emerge from the doldrums. I don't think they engendered quite that same level of dislike. And it's maybe because their teams, this is a generalisation, but through the 70s and 80s, they were almost regal, weren't they, Martin? I mean, everyone in England just went, that's Liverpool. They play this great football. They're full of... They weren't hated. They were kind of even slightly admired, but almost playing in a different level to every day. And we laughed when they got beat by Wimbledon, obviously, as neutrals. Of course you did. But people could say they were a great side in the way that they maybe wouldn't do later with United, but then times are changing as well, and so maybe that's not a fair comparison.
I think United's success gets to some level that it does reach that Liverpool bracket, and people have to kind of soften that approach. That mid-90s, and I think it's either 93, 94, 94, 95, when Alan Mullery, I think, is on a TV panel, sport football panel show, discussing the events of the week, and he's wearing a Blackburn Rovers jacket or cap or something like that, because he's like, well, of course we're all behind them, kind of thing. It's Ferguson. It's not the club, I don't think. That he's a man who got up early in the morning to practice being angry and confrontational, and that's the result of that. And it's only when you're 20, 30 years down the line that you just have to say, well, I mean,
you're marvellous.
Yeah.
But you're not going to hate Bob Paisley, are you? You can't hate Bob Paisley. No, that's true.
So that's why I think it happened. We'll get to all that in due course. One game to touch on, Adam. The curtain was raised, as it always is, by the Charity Shield. Again, judged by the celebrations, listeners, viewers, just how seriously these players take this particular fixture. There is an absolute pre-season friendly feel about it. It is at Wembley. It is Liverpool against Leeds United, and Sky have it live, which again is just this appetizer for the following weekend and everything really kind of kicking off Saturday afternoon. It was wonderful fun. It was 4-3 in the end. Leeds, always ahead. 1-0, 1-1, 2-1, 2-2, and then they go 4-2 up before a remarkable third goal that somehow Gordon Strachan can't keep out of the net, even though it's trundling towards him, I think, from Mark Wright. But Cantona scores a hat-trick. It highlights a few things, Adam. He's brilliant. and the venom, the utter hatred in which he powers through the second, I think, close range, right enough, but Jesus, I'm not sure a ball's been hit that hard. He is just he's just the boy. He has something about him that is just a wee bit other and a wee bit elevated than anyone else on that pitch. Liverpool are shambles with cross balls. The fourth, Cantona's third. Grobler. Yeah. And again, lack of Hansen, lack of organisation, all the things we've talked about. It is half a friendly, but even then, Leeds can't keep kids out of close. Neither can Liverpool. Cantona's brilliant. Yeah, that's my takeaways from the curtain raiser interview.
Do you know, I'm never really that fair to goalkeepers, as I'm sure people know, particularly of this time. But I wonder with the final Leeds goal, that would have been, wouldn't it, the header? It's going out on the opposite side, right? And it's going out for a throw in or a corner,
weird,
and it just hits a flag, just a total. So I don't know whether the defence have just not got themselves set for the ball. Is it Rocastle bringing the ball back in?
They think it's going to be a corner, and it hits the flag, and they're sort of shit. If I think it actually might go out, and kind of swing back in. Anyway, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. They're not well set.
I would also say as well, I know Cantona is obviously known as a flair player, and some of the goals that will come on to Man United, a lot of them are dinks and flicks and all sorts. These would be three very un-flair player type goals, I think, two big shots, like you said, and one coming in at the back post to header. But his physicality, I think, is something that people don't talk an awful lot about, I don't think, but he was a big,
huge
unit. And he could glide with it, and he had lovely touches we've seen. But in this game, for sure, that could have been an English centre forward from 20 years before scoring those three goals. So that was interesting to see. A little bit elaborate with Tony Dirigo's. Little bit elaborate setup for Tony Dirigo's deflected free kick as well. There was like five of them over the ball, and I'm not sure what was going on, and it trundles in.
They're all
you could see Russian Saunders even in that game, and okay, it's a bit of a friendly thing, but you could see there's a decent partnership there for sure. And it's obviously we spoke about Saunders. It's a bit of a shame that he goes, but yeah, I can imagine it being an absolute appetite whetter because it's goals everywhere, late goals as well. A little bit of slapdash at the end with Gordon Strachan not making himself essentially. So I can imagine as a kind of curtain raiser or the game before the curtain raiser. In that sense, I can imagine it having definitely whetted the appetite for sure.
Yeah, there's some interesting things, I think, if you look at the two team lineups. And firstly, the depth that Leeds have got. Liverpool, in comparison, don't name a full bench. They only have 4 on the bench rather than 5, which they were allowed. Their starting defence features David Burrows, Nick Tanner, and Mike Marsh. No disrespect meant to them, but they're not good enough to be playing for Liverpool, certainly not 3/4 of the defence. And they bring on It's Van Cosma, 1980s Scottish football's It's Van Cosma.
Dunfermline Athletics, It's Van Cosma.
And he is a Dunfermline Athletic legend, but it's bizarre to see it. I think of him as a player I watched when Rangers were playing in the late 80s. I do not think of him as being a player who should be featuring for Liverpool in the year of our Lord 1992. And yet there he is. They do have a young Don Hutchison comes off the bench that day as well. But yeah, you look at that back four, and I have to admit, I hold my hands up to this. Even as a child in the 80s, I did not get Bruce Grobbelaar goalkeeper, and he won plenty, so I'm wrong. But I just never got him at all. And Bruce Grobbelaar on the slide behind the defence full of kids. No, that's a recipe for disaster.
I think
Don Hutchison's another one for me. I was like, no, he did not play for Liverpool. That's a nonsense. So I remember that.
Liverpool had spent a fair bit of money on a young David James from Watford. He's on the bench, and of course he's going to come through. But it's just lacking experience, and I can kind of understand where Souness wants to hang on to that experience, but maybe just the wrong ones. But there we are. We're up and running. And I remember this. I watched the game live, I think, and Match of the Day highlights were on at night. And I can remember, even though John Watson's commentating, hearing from the next booth or whatever, the distinctive voice of Andy Gray piercing through those sound protection. Not quite what it is now in 1992, but there's a nice way to end that Sky are indeed piercing through, and the whole new ball game kicks off next week. The advert, lads, alive and kicking, the most homoerotic minutes of television since Top Gun.
Please put the link in the description.
I was stunned.
I mean, it's, you know, we're all very progressive, modern, metrosexual men, lads, right? And I think all of us are quite happy to make the game as wide and as powerful as possible for so many people. But it was a bit surprising in 1992 to be seeing footballers of other teams showering together in an advert, and I'm not sure who came up with that idea, but just as a general rule, stay away from showering for advertising purposes unless you're advertising a shower.
Soap or shower gel or whatever.
You know what's funny as well, like how we define everything, don't we, by decades in terms of, oh, this was the 80s or this was the 90s, and there's an assumption that on the 31st of December 1989 the 80s end. You have a look at some of those hairstyles and all sorts of stuff, and it's the overlap is always funny. So what we think of the 90s is probably about 7 years in the middle, really, before you end up getting to the 2000s. That's something that always fascinates me when you look at a bit of culture or a game or a film or something, and you think, oh, it's 1991, 92, that must be the same as like 97, 98, and it is not. Those whenever we're playing Football Manager or you're watching TV and stuff, and you realise that the Dolomites, Northern Italy, are pretty much Germany, or they're so more German. Arsene Wenger being born in Alsace, which France, but it's basically Germany. It's all those borders round about things where those grey areas are that are really fascinating.
Well, I would say, though, at the time, that Simple Minds track was very 80s. Its production was very 80s, and there had been a very sort of conscious hit back at that sort of cock rock, FM radio rock because of grunge, which was, sweeping the charts at this time. Nirvana had come through the year before, but you had Pearl Jam and stuff. So it kind of, as daft as it might sound, that advert, even in 1992, was kind of dated because they were doing the big sort of stadium rock, Gillette, the best a man can get style thing. Whereas the charts didn't reflect that.
It's Top Gun.
It's Top Gun. And I'm sure Quentin Tarantino would have came to the same conclusion watching that advert as he came to about Top Gun.
Indeed. Local hero as well, I'm pretty sure was battered out quite a fair bit during these early years, now very much adopted by Newcastle. Anyway, we will talk about all things production, presentation, and the product next week as we run through August until maybe a certain event in November. Thank you for setting that scene, that heady summer of 1992. Thank you, David.
And once again, lads, we have, I think, alienated the Oldham Athletic supporting members of our audience because we have failed to touch on Oldham, and we're not going to have many years where we get the opportunity to. So our apologies to the Oldham Athletic community.
We've got plenty of time and plenty to discuss. A very fine and interesting escape for them. But that's the finale, David. Don't spoil it yet. Adam, thanks.
Sure.
Thank you. Yeah, looking forward to getting into some games and going into a bit more detail on how the teams are playing. That's been 2 set up shows, if you like, in my mind. So yeah, looking forward to getting into it and seeing who does well, who's out the doors early, and who doesn't quite manage to maintain it. So yeah, it's good fun.
And those who don't get out early, all hope is not lost, put it that way. Until next week, bye for now.